Hi, I'm Gary, and this is EV Musings, a podcast about renewables, electric vehicles, and things that are interesting to electric vehicle owners. And on the show today, we'll be looking at charger maintenance. This season of the podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence. Our main topic of discussion today is charger maintenance. It's something of a hot topic with some EV drivers, as it often contributes to charger anxiety for someone new to the field who's doing their first public charge and wants to be sure that the chargers will work, for example. The last thing they want to do is to turn up at a site with a handful of available chargers to find that in reality most of them are down due to technical issues. The Public ChargePoint Regulations 2023 have a specific section in them concerned with charger availability. The legislation calls for 99% uptime across a ChargePoint operator's rapid chargers. In theory, that's an admirable thing to be aiming for, but in reality, the devil's in the details with things like that. For example, it doesn't differentiate between 99% uptime for individual chargers and 99% uptake for the complete offering across the whole ChargePoint operator's network. As I said before on the show, if you have 1,000 units and the two that are closest to you are permanently out of order, then they're still complying with the regulations, but that doesn't mean that you have 99% availability on your specific local charger. Furthermore, the definition of uptime is a little flexible in the Public ChargePoint Regulations 2023, especially as it applies to the rapid chargers, but not the slow or fast chargers, which gives leeway to operators who are AC only. Now, I do want to put things into context here. Again, I said this before on the show. Petrol pumps are not as reliable as you might think. I worked for 18 months during lockdown delivering groceries for a retailer with on-site fuel stations. At the end of every shift, I had to refill the diesel vans I was driving. And in those 18 months, the number of times every single petrol or diesel pump was working could be counted on the fingers of a mitten. But we need to hold EV chargers to a slightly higher standard because A, they're new technology that should be less prone to faults due to wear and tear, and B, because in a nascent industry like EV charging, we can't afford for public confidence to be depleted by constant hardware and software faults. Having said that, the chargers themselves are complex pieces of equipment. You need some hardware to physically dispatch the electricity. You need software to manage the current flow, software to communicate with the car, software to communicate with the back office, hardware to manage payment processing, card readers, etc., software to manage that process, etc., etc., etc. So here to talk to us today is someone who looks at charger servicing for a living.
I'm Brad. I lead the business development for a software company serving the mobility space and have worked in suppliers for the forecourt and EV world for the last 10 years.
So today we're going to focus on charging reliability and maintenance, that aspect of it. So just give me the 30,000-foot elevator pitch for what your organization does, please.
Sure. So Techniche EV, we're a global software company and we've supplied mobility operators for the last 30 years. And we help CPOs to automate as many of the manual steps as possible to ensure that chargers can remain online and operational so that drivers get the best charging experience as possible.
Right. So sort of building on that, I want to differentiate between sort of the maintenance aspect and the repairs aspect when it comes to charging, because obviously one of those is scheduled or scheduled, depending on which side of the Atlantic you come from, and it tries to prevent issues in the first place. And the other one is sort of ad hoc and it solves existing issues. So where do you see your organization fitting?
We'll cover both of those aspects. And I think CPOs that are the best operators will focus much more on preventative, because if they can make sure that filters are changed and those chargers are actually getting the right maintenance schedules planned in and they're happening within their SLAs, that's going to lead to less breakdowns and ensure those drivers can actually charge more often. I think that's fine and good operators can do that. But I think the real problem comes from when breakdowns happen with these chargers and how CPOs address it with the processes they follow.
Now, I know the whole subject of maintenance, charger availability / reliability could be quite an emotive subject because, needing to ensure that when someone needs a charge, they can get it. But if we take the emotion out of this, why is it important to ensure that chargers are reliable?
Well, I think there's several factors here. First of all, the operator and the reputation of that operator, they're all out there trying to make make money. If they're having a reputation that these charges aren't available and operational, drivers are going to choose to go elsewhere. So that means they're not going to get that halo revenue they'd expect from getting people to come shop in their convenience stores or use their food service. So that's a key thing. And it's really difficult to get EV drivers to come charge at your locations, because most people choose to have an EV because they want to be charging at home where it's cheaper. So it's becoming really difficult for operators to get people to their site. So if their assets aren't working, they're losing money, not just on charging, but on much wider amenities as well. And then I'd say on the flip side of it, it's important for that perception for chargers to be working, so that there isn't these headline stories out there that charging infrastructure isn't out there and supporting drivers, and that's preventing the transition for people to make the switch. So there's several factors it's impacting.
Now, I was in a discussion with somebody the other day, and he brought up the old the iPhone analogy, which is, well, how can I be sure that when I'm driving my EV, the battery won't die in the middle? Because, my iPhone could be 100% in the morning, and I look at it half an hour later, and it's already dropped down to 40%, etc., because I've had it for 3+ years. And I think there's a lot of this mentality of equating electric vehicles and how they work with the iPhone. And if we sort of extend that analogy, we've got charging of a phone. Now, I can't recall a single instance where I've actually had a charger for an iPhone, plugged it in, and it hasn't worked. When you look at an EV charger, especially a rapid charger, there appear to be multiple points of failure along the way, potential points of failure along the way. So what are the key failure points when we're looking at EV chargers that we don't have when we're looking at something simple like an iPhone charger?
Sure, there's quite a lot of contributing factors here. So if you think about these chargers, the hardware, there's lots going on there. So there's plenty of things that could cause an issue. You've got power. You've got connectivity to the internet. Both of those things need to be working and uninterrupted for that charger to operate. You've then got the driver and user error, and all of these chargers follow different processes to get them operational and actually providing a charge. And then lastly, you've got the car involved. So the car causes a number of issues as well. So there's, what's that, five problems that contribute to. It's much different to a very simple charger coming out the wall for your iPhone. So there's a lot more to it.
Okay. And I understand exactly what you're saying there, and I agree with it. But let me put my devil's advocate on and reply with one word: Tesla. They don't have these problems.
Kind of nailed it.
Yeah. Why is that?
I think there's two buckets here, right? And first one's going to be about the process the CPO follows to address issues when they happen. That's one thing. I think we should dig into that in a moment. And the second one is the root causes of these charges. And there's multiple manufacturers that are being used by operators that require all sorts of different technology and different processes to keep them operational. So if you're a CPO with different manufacturers in your estate, you've got different things you need to be aware of. Tesla, closed loop system, they've developed it all in-house. They're not going to outside manufacturers to come up with the technology for them and then trying to work it around. Tesla have kind of created that, and they've done a fantastic job.
But again, playing devil's advocate, there are companies out there that use Tesla hardware.
Yeah, there are.
And they presumably have got to the point where they don't have all the communication issues that you've talked about. They don't have the issues with the cars. They don't have any of the things that you've just talked about 2 minutes ago about what caused the issues with a lot of the other chargers. So what I'm getting to is, it is possible to have hardware out there that is not a closed loop that works extremely reliably. So what is it about the Alpatronics and the ABBs and the Chempowers that is not happening?
I would put it down to the process the CPO follows. And these are companies out there meant to be technology companies, but they're actually operating in very manual ways. And I feel for them for a moment, because shock, most CPOs aren't profitable. They might have some profitable sites out there, but they're burning cash and they're just trying to keep their heads above water whilst trying to scale. And we were at an event last week, the ICNC in Berlin. Fantastic event, probably the most amount of CPOs you'll ever see in one place. And we got to speak to probably almost 30 of them. And they've all suffering from the same problems of why Chempower Alpatronic charges are going down. But it's all about how they actually resolve them when they happen. And some of them are more developed than others, great. But others are operating in a very manual way. So just to paint you a bit of a picture of what they're doing, if they're not a 24-hour operation, there might be a small CPO, for instance. They will come in the morning, their network operations team will go and review their back-end solution to see what issues have happened overnight that I need to address. And they'll be trying to manually sort and prioritize which ones they need to do. And they'll be going by which are the heaviest used sites. Are there any of their clients got really strict SLAs that they need to adhere to? So they'll be trying to pick those out first of all. And then they'll be trying to diagnose actually what the problems are. So they would have presented some error codes. And each manufacturer has different error codes and different remedial steps to resolve them. So they'll be sense checking those. In all of that, they'll be going on lunch, talking to colleagues. It might require a reset for that charger, depending on what the OEM states they need to do. So they'll go and perform that. Or the real headache is when they have to organize on-site maintenance call-outs. And that error code, is it going to be covered under the warranty contract? Who is my maintenance provider? What's the SLA for them? I'll document that on an Excel spreadsheet and then email them. Even talking about that, that's a long process. So put that into reality. All of that contributes to downtime. And if you're not efficient at it, you're just going to frustrate drivers. And these CPOs who aren't profitable are just trying to keep lean operations. So they don't want to increase headcounts, but they're trying to scale the network at the same time as utilizations increases, wear and tears increases. So they've got a real cluster of problems that they're trying to deal with, and that can be solved with automation.
And I fully understand that. But again, I'm going to come back with the contrary view on this, which is this isn't actually new technology. Personally, I've been driving electric vehicles for 7 years. The underlying technology is still fundamentally the same. So surely they should at this point have been able to iron out all the problems. I think you gave 4 different reasons why things go wrong a short while back. Now, one of those is the user interface, and that's a complete different thing. You know, we can sort out why it is that certain users can't, or we can discuss at a later point why it is that certain users can't actually intuitively use certain chargers. And I've got whole episodes about that. But the whole issue of the comms, why are we putting chargers in places where the communication isn't working? What is it about the internal hardware that is faulting out? Why is it we're continually having these kind of issues on technology which is not cutting edge at the moment, is it?
It's not. And there's a real, everything you described there, I can think of scenarios for each of those things. So there's very prominent charging manufacturers out there that are having significant problems with their AC, DC power modules. They're having to go out and replace them. CPOs are obviously, that's an expensive cost, and it costs time to resolve all of those things. It should have been solved when that manufacturer was designed and put into practice. Unfortunately, something was missed, and they're having to backtrack and solve it. So that's a problem. Also think when corners are probably being cut for communication issues. I think one of the biggest underlying problems that the industry faces that no one's talking about is the connectivity with the payment unit. And that's not the charger, that's the payment unit. And this is anecdotally, I can't prove this, but I would say 1 out of 3 times when I go to a fast charging site, I will either have a problem myself, or I'll see people having a problem where they've gone through the Alpatronic menu of selecting the connector they want to use, how they're going to pay for it. Typically being lazy, I'll use a payment card, and then you'll go to authorize it and nothing happens. So you've got to tap it on your Apple Pay, nothing. Try a debit card, nothing happens. And then you have to resort to downloading the app and joining the service or choosing a different charger. That is an unreported issue that is contributing to charger availability that the industry isn't talking about. I know you do, but the industry isn't. And the CPOs that are saying, oh, we've got 99% uptime. It's not transparent because people aren't able to make charges, and it's causing frustration, and people talk, and they'll tell their friends.
It's interesting because the very next question I have on my list is talk to me about credit card terminals and the interface there. What are the failure points? Because to me, again, there are 2 issues related to this. One is that in a large proportion of the charges that you see, the payment terminal has been bolted on as an afterthought, and it's not integrated in. So of course you've then got compatibility issues there. You've got water ingress issues where the cable enters and that sort of thing. And then the other aspect of that is the underlying comms and the software/security issue. So even if you do have an integrated payment terminal, you've still got to get the issue where you slap your card on there and for some reason it's not making the correct connection out to the network, or it's not speaking with the bank correctly, or the return codes are incorrect or whatever. So what can we do to solve that? Because again, I did it the other day. I was out at a festival. There was somebody there who had one of these little square credit card terminals. They were selling vegetarian hot dogs. I slapped the card on there and it validated within 5 or 6 seconds. Why is it EV chargers have such a different experience when it comes to validating with a credit card or a payment card?
Yeah, that's super frustrating because you can always pay someone when you're at a festival with an iZettle, right? But you think about the scenario on a plane. So if you're paying for Kit Kat and a coffee on a BA airplane, they're actually not connected live. So you're making the payment and it's kind of taking your details and it doesn't actually process until that flight's landed and got back into comms again. So I do not know why that technology cannot just be used to pre-authorize payment terminals at EV chargers. It feels like a simple fix, but this is probably a conversation that CPOs need to have with the likes of NIAX and PATA to improve this, because you're right, you can pay at a festival, you can pay on a plane. Why can't we solve this at a charging station?
Because again, it's not new technology. We've had payment terminals for decades now, and it's the underlying technology is slick and it works. So, like you, I constantly hit issues with paying with credit card. I rarely now pay with a credit card or a payment card at a charger. I will use an RFID card. ZapMap, sponsors of this podcast, now have the card that they can use. There are others out there on the market. And that's the other thing. I can slap an RFID card on the reader and the response is almost instantaneous. Help me understand why that's different to the way credit cards work.
Well, I'm probably going to be uneducated on the actual technology difference there, but I think we need to be able to provide different options for the consumer to be able to make these charges, have fail-safes in place. That's probably the best that I can do. What I would say is better reporting on these failure types is probably needed for the CPOs. So that's where if an authorization hasn't happened with a credit card, that needs to be picked up either through the OCPP logs or through an interface with the PATA or NIAX unit, so we can see where these failures are and identify these behaviors where there are issues, so that the CPO can actually have a picture of where the problems are in their estate and start to put fixes in place for them. I also think clear instruction for the driver as well, because some of this is also going to happen with user error, right? I've faced that as well before, where I've picked up a charger, think I know what I'm doing, I'll plug it into my car and then go to use the payment reader. I've done that in the wrong order. I should have actually read the signage first. Wouldn't it be great if we could just standardize that with plug and charge?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you've listened to my podcast, I'm a big advocate of plug and charge. I think everybody should do it, and it will solve a huge number of the problems that we're talking about here. Not all of them, but it will definitely cut down on the errors that we've got. But again, that is another thing. Why is it that we cannot say, I don't care whether you plug in and validate or validate and plug in? Why does that cause an issue on chargers? I mean, standardize if you want, plug in first all the time or validate first all the time. Fair enough. But I can't see why it is that sequence in which you do that has an effect on whether your payment is validated or not. It's,
It does seem mad, but the factors that are going to contribute to that is the hardware, the payment terminal, and the process the CPO wants to follow. And unless we standardize those things as an industry, everyone's going to think this is the right way to do it, and they'll give their logic to why. Someone else will come up with something different. And if you're trading between these charging operators, you're getting a mix of experiences, and it causes confusion. So I'm a fan of introducing some standards through the likes of the regulatory bodies that can help enforce this.
Before we move on from payment process, I just want to look back to something you said a few seconds ago. Am I right in thinking that if I try and pay by credit card and there's an issue, it isn't a default that it logs that on the charger somewhere? Or is it a fact that it is a default that it logs it, but nobody actually is checking on the back end to see how many times there's been an issue? Which one of those is accurate? Have I understood or misunderstood that?
Again, it will vary between manufacturer and vary between CPO. I think for the most part, that information can be captured in the payment reader. Once it's gone into authorization mode, if something hasn't authorized, there's been a fail there. But then it's getting that information to the CPO to have a diagnostic to see how many of those failures have happened. I think that's where it sits.
I think I'll come back and talk a little bit about some of the other potential issues that maybe aren't being appropriately logged a little bit later on. But I want to move on and talk about how much does weather impact reliability? Because we did an episode on canopies recently, and I'm wondering if having a canopy over a charger will result in potentially fewer call-outs due to a lower weather impact or not.
It's funny you should say that. I think the unmanned locations where they're not under covers definitely have more issues, right? And for a varied number of factors. We've got some customers that are in the Middle East who have really high temperatures, and that affects components, that affects the performance of the chargers, and they are standardizing putting canopies over those chargers so they can actually protect the charger from direct sunlight, which causes problems. So I absolutely believe that there is an issue there. We're actually doing a study, and we released one last year on all the issues that cause downtime for fast DC charging. We had a sample size of about 5,000 DC chargers. It's going to be expanded for this year, and actually looking into weather specifically, and if we can actually identify if it's weather has been a cause of that, because we've looked at the hardware failures, and they typically go from power, communications, payment terminal, hardware failure, I think, are the main ones that are causing problems. Weather is probably something that just needs a bit more in the root cause and remedy scenarios to actually identify what's caused that breakdown in the hardware. Has it been a weather related thing? And in some OCPP logs, we're actually, we can look at the weather when that error code was presented to see if there was any adverse event at the same time. We're pulling in from different sources there, but we could do some correlation of that data with the right AI and machine learning tools.
Would that capture long-term cumulative effects? So if you've got a charger sat out there with no canopy and it's constantly exposed to rain, for example, over time there's going to be some, there may be rusting on the outside, there may be water ingress. The point at which it fails may not directly correlate to, poor weather. It may just be continual degradation over time due to rust and things like that. And I don't suppose you'd be able to track that sort of data, would you?
You know what? You've given me an idea, because we absolutely would be able to track that. But have we put the metrics in place to capture that? No, it's probably the first thing. So when CPOs, forecourt operators are using our software, they can tag their locations with any sorts of information that's going to be useful for them. Actually having a field in there to say, is the charger protected by a canopy? Sounds like a very sensible suggestion, Gary. So I'm actually going to steal that. And see if we can start to create some metrics around it, because it clearly is having an impact, but we're not tracking it, or the industry is not tracking it.
Because, of course, there is a knock-on effect of that when it comes to screens, because one of the problems that a lot of people have is the screens are very difficult to read. In certain weathers, there are the sun tends to bleach out a lot of the things. You get the covering there degrading in the sunlight, and the same thing happens on the credit cards as well. So the credit card readers, I've seen people sort of down on their hands and knees looking at these
credit cards. Away from the shadow or the light. Yeah, exactly.
So I'm wondering whether there's potential to sort of expand it to include screens and the impact that the elements are having on those.
Sure, I can't see why not. An example I often use when I speak to CPOs for the first time is when we're comparing uptime versus availability and the difference of those things. Uptime, not to teach anyone to suck eggs for a moment, but uptime is essentially when the charger is reporting data saying I'm alive to the back end and it's up. And that's usually the metric that CPOs are reporting on. Again, with some, the one that really grates me is if one charger at a charging location is up, then the whole site is classed as up. That annoys me and isn't transparent. Whereas available is actually, is that charger able to make a charge for the driver? One of the issues I always talk about is a cracked screen or mist on a screen, something that's preventing the driver from being able to make a charge. In my mind, that is charger unavailable. You have not been able to make that. It's not going to be able to be picked up by an error code. It's going to have to be reported, or looking at diagnostics to say this charger would usually be making a charge on a Monday morning. It isn't today. We should send someone to look at it. So I think that is a major issue, and we should really be reporting more on charger availability than uptime.
Talk to me about that. I mean, I I said it a couple of times on the podcast. I was at a well-known large CPO's hub, and there was an event going on. And at the time, I was driving a vehicle that had a Chatabo connector, and I tried to charge, and for some reason, the Chatabo connector would not connect. But this was also a location that had a dual charger, so you could charge Chatabo and CCS. Not at the same time, you could do one or the other. So I moved out of the charger. Somebody else moved in who had CCS. They plugged in and it worked correctly. So is that flagged as a unit that's available or not?
It won't be. No, it won't be. That'll be flagged as up. But really, we should be looking here as there should be a simple mechanism to see that CCS connector's been connected, it's failed, and we should be classing that as unavailable. It's really going to bring the metric down. So when they talk about 99% availability, it's really going to bring that metric down. Our software can look at it from a rudimentary level to see if we get access to the OCPP logs to determine have there been particularly short sessions, low power delivered, low peaks, and all of those things are, if they happen once, it's probably okay. But if it's happening multiple times, going to present the idea that charger is actually having some difficulty, and it won't be presenting an error code. But if you can actually look at those things and identify those bad behaviors, you can get your operations team to spend more time looking at those complex issues rather than doing resets and organizing maintenance manually, which all their time is consumed with at the moment.
The corollary, the additional thing that happened at the same site was there was another charger there where the credit card reader wasn't working, but the RFID reader was, and the app. So people were able to charge. As far as the system was concerned, the charger was available, but if you were trying to pay with the credit card, it wouldn't initiate the charge. So again, there's so many variations and subtleties about availability versus reliability and all that sort of stuff. It's to me, it's a minefield.
And you can start to get really granular on this and say it's unavailable for credit card users, but available for RFIDs. And for the consumer to look at those metrics and go, well, do I want to charge with this CPO because their credit card availability is not as good as their RFID? The consumer just wants to know, is it working? And that's kind of it. And they don't want to, they're putting trust in the CPOs that they're providing the service that they need, right? So they just want simple messaging. And I appreciate that's hard when there's so many contributing factors to this as well. So it's not an easy process to solve for.
Can I go back and just confirm something you said recently, which is if I'm at a site that has 4 chargers and 3 of them are out of order and one of them is working, that whole site is deemed to be working?
I've heard that is a way, and it's something that Tesla have reported on as well, that if they've got one charger operational at a site, then that's up. That site is operational. That's good to go. And I don't think that's transparent for the driver, because that charger could be in use and there could be a queue for it. And that is not a good way to operate. And I think we need to push for more transparency.
So I totally agree. Now, the other thing that's been happening recently, and there's an instance at a local hub near me, cable cutting. So if the cable gets cut, does the CPO realize that the cables have been cut, or are they relying on people like me to go, oh, by the way, I've just been to your site, the cables have been cut?
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is a hot topic and it's really costing the industry a significant amount of money. And I was surprised. We've got a customer in Denmark, and I would have classed as probably one of the lowest crime rate countries in the world, right? But actually they're suffering really bad from cable cuts. And they're getting 20 euros around that for when they get a cable and they can process it and get that money for it. But it costs the CPO 1,000 euros to replace that cable. So it's a significant cost. You can see why these CPOs are not profitable. And it depends on the charger manufacturer, and depends on the back end, and depends on the maintenance process that you've got. So with a well-known charger brand, it doesn't just present one error to say, charge has been cut, set the alarms off. It presents a series of error codes. And we've had to work out with the CPO what this series is, and that means a cable's been cut. And we can get an alert out to the operational team to get on the CCTV, set the alarms off. Because if you've got a bank of 4 or 5 chargers with 2 cables on each, if we're doing this within 30 seconds of that first cable being cut, we can hopefully prevent the rest of those cables being cut, which obviously is a cost for the CPO, but then it's frustration for the driver, because that charge is not going to be fixed probably for a month. And I went down to visit my mum down in Mudderford Quay. Very well-known European CPO's got chargers in the main Quay car park. And I went there to charge because my charger, my Audi e-tron, is only about 120 miles in the winter. And I went down there, didn't have enough charge to get back, had to go charge, cables were cut. I said to my mum, I said, how long has it been like that? She's like, oh, weeks. And they'd done multiple locations in Christchurch and Muddyford. So it's a real problem.
I don't know whether you'll know the answer to this, but why is it that if somebody is reported, or if a charger is reported as having the cables cut, it can take months for them to get those cables repaired? I mean, yeah, Mudderford, it's it's not the middle of the country. It's somewhere out on the edge there, and there's probably more call for repairs elsewhere, central London, things like that. But I don't think they should be ignoring it and having it sitting there unrepaired for months. Well, what's behind that? Do we know?
I'll give you my perspective. There's a cost element of this. So someone has to be sitting on those spare cables, which obviously if you've got 1,000 odd charges in the country and you're seeing X amount of cable cuts, you're going to need to hold stock of X amount. That's a cost that you have to sit on your P&L and eat. Secondly is the availability of engineers to get out and resolve those charger cable cuts. So getting them out in a quick amount of time to resolve them is another problem. I'd say they're the two main factors.
Let's move on a little bit and talk about your specific offering to ChargePoint operators. Are you employed by is your company employed by specific ChargePoint operators, or do they sort of buy a service from you? How does that operate?
They buy a software service from us. So we're a SaaS solution hosted in Microsoft Azure. So it's very well respected within the industry, and we've been supplying forecourt operators for almost 30 years with asset maintenance management software. Forecourt operators know how to address faults and breakdowns with their assets because they've been in operation for a long, long time, and they've had hundreds, if not thousands, of sites that they need to keep in check. So their processes are very robust. CPOs are new businesses, and they're having to find out and create processes as they go. So we're trying to show these CPOs that with integrated maintenance software, you can automate many of those manual steps that your operations team will be doing. Resets, organizing engineer visits to site, making sure they're hitting it within SLA, following the process you want them to follow as a CPO, signing in, taking images on entry, on exit. All those types of things can be controlled with a maintenance solution, and most of them just don't have that process at the moment.
Interesting. So are you able to share sort of some statistics around maintenance, or the costs that maintenance or lack of maintenance has incurred on certain ChargePoint operators? Do you have any good financial data there that the listeners might go, that's interesting to know?
Racking my brain here, probably anecdotally. So typically the stuff I would talk about is especially because our customers are mainly manned forecourt locations. We do have some CPOs that have some unmanned sites. So the easiest thing to talk about is if your assets aren't working from an EV perspective, the likelihood of that driver returning to your site, if they haven't been able to make a charge and get to their end destination, is shockingly low. Like they will not return to your site. If back in the day when they're driving a petrol or a diesel car and they turn up and one of your pumps weren't working, 16 other pumps, and they're all probably going to be working. So it wasn't an issue. Where if you have that with an EV driver and they're not returning, you have lost that driver's loyalty, who would have spent £10 of the basket spend in your site, picking up all the everyday essentials or food for now. They're the metrics I try and talk about, is the return and loyalty of that driver, the perception they have of your brand, and then the lost halo revenue by not having these assets available. Hard facts, I probably wouldn't be able to call anything more detailed than that.
And I think that's a very interesting thing because, again, I've said this a couple of times on the podcast. During lockdown, I was a grocery delivery for Morrison's. And at the end of every shift, we used to have to go to the on-site fuel station and refill the vans. And in the 18 months that I did that job, I don't think there was a single time when I went to the petrol pump forecourt and every single pump was working. There was always one that had the black and yellow tape.
Yellow thing on it, yeah.
And yet, people don't go, I'm never going to go to Morrison's and use their pumps again because one of them just happened to be not working the day I was there. And it's interesting how when you're looking at electric vehicle chargers versus petrol pumps, people have a higher tolerance for failure at the pump than they do at the EV charger. And I find that interesting.
It's much more sensitive. And if you found a pump that wasn't working at a site, never let that sit with you and then tell your friends about it. If you go to an EV charger where there may be one or two chargers and they've impacted your ability to get to your next destination or made you late or whatever it might be, you will tell your friends, and that will just spiral, and they will tell people, and it just creates this hysteria around the idea that EVs aren't going to be reliable, and it's a real problem. So it's not an easy thing for operators to face into.
Indeed. What's the most egregious maintenance problem that you've encountered with a charger? Egregious. One of those where you've gone, how the hell did this happen? And why the hell did this happen?
I'm trying to think of a few scenarios in my mind that I think graffiti, I think is probably one, like mindless destruction of chargers. You don't tend to get it in the manned locations so a forecourt operator or an EV hub, they're all going to be fine because you've got people on site. But when you've got these unmanned locations or you're placing it at a retail destination or a car park somewhere, they're the ones that suffer from vandalism, from graffiti, from just anyone causing harm to that charge. And that's probably the most frustrating as a driver to pull up to, because you're just disappointed that people have damaged this unnecessarily. And then also for the operator, I mean, it's just costing them downtime, costing them reputation when it wasn't their fault. That they can put better security measures in place, but they're the ones I think frustrate the most amount of people.
And have you had many, or are you aware of many instances where the chargers themselves have been physically damaged by vehicles? I know a lot of them have bump stops and bollards and things like that, but yeah, especially for things like the 7 kilowatt and the 1122 kilowatt chargers. Have you had many where cars have actually reversed in and knocked them over and damaged them? Or is that something that doesn't happen?
Yeah, it happens, right? But if you look at our dashboards and see what are the main reasons for chargers being down, that's kind of one of the lowest out there. It's accident by driver, but it does happen. People will reverse into it, or a truck will come by and clip it. So there's all sorts of those factors in there, but it's not much. The main things are the ones I've spoken about already, but it does happen.
And at what point in sort of the maintenance schedule will either yourself or the CPO go, right, we've repaired this unit X number of times, it keeps going wrong, we need to replace it. We need to whip the existing unit out and put either a brand new unit in or a different unit, maybe by a different manufacturer.
So in our reporting, you can report on almost any metric in our system. So there's good comparisons of charger availability. So however your CPO business is segmented regionally, by brand, by destination type, by format, you can split and see that maintenance spend, that downtime, and that task that those areas of the business has suffered from. But then you can also do it by charger manufacturer. So you can sit there and you can compare your Alpatronic, your Kempower, your Tritium to see who's costing me the most in unbudgeted maintenance spend, the most amount of call-outs that aren't covered by warranty, or the most amount of downtime. And with those metrics, you can start to make some informed decisions about which manufacturers are performing best for me, and you can make some strategic purchasing. The same for contractors, and then the same for assets. So we've got a metric on one of the dashboards that shows the age of the asset, the amount of tasks it's had against it when it's broken down, the amount of downtime it's had, and then the amount of maintenance spend, and also the replacement cost of it. And then you'll be able to weigh up at what point is it costing me to continue to repair this asset, or is it better for me to just purchase a new one? And you can make that decision very quickly by seeing the top 10 outliers that are costing more than actually a replacement.
And sort of two questions, one of which I hope you answer, the other one you may not. From the list of charge point manufacturers that you've mentioned, is there one that you find happens to be less reliable overall than the others?
I probably wouldn't want to paint a picture badly for anyone out there. I think there's nothing egregious that I would say that could really point to one manufacturer. So I won't call anybody out because I'm conscious to maintain relationships, but everyone could be better, right?
Yeah. So my next question was going to be which one is it, but that's fair enough. If you're not going to call a name out, then no problem with that. What's the one thing that you would like to see? The one thing that could happen or you would want to see happen that would make your job easier?
It's a difficult subject to talk about. And I've had to practice over the last couple of years of getting the elevator pitch right as to what our product does and the problems it solves for. So I'd like some better awareness that there are technologies in place that can help solve some of these issues the CPO is having. Each time you speak to them, like, oh, I didn't actually know you could do this. Well, we've been trying to cobble together a ticketing system, an Excel spreadsheet, an unintegrated asset management system. So it's better awareness that there are automated solutions that can solve these problems and improve the performance of these CPOs. Even just automating resets that solves 60 to 70% of problems. Just do that. Just do that with our software. The customers that we've put in place almost overnight saw a 4 percentage point increase in charger availability just by addressing resets when a charger required it. Just do that. CPOs knew that was possible. You should all implement it now.
When you first went out to CPOs, were they very much of the case of, well, we don't really need this, we've got our own stuff? Did you have a problem trying to sell into the charge point operators? Or were they sort of saying, this is what we want, give it to us, give it to us?
I'm still having those conversations now. So they feel like they're doing it because they've got a ticketing system and they've got maintenance partners, but all of those steps could still be improved with integrating your systems and having maintenance workflows that would address those problems. So I'm still trying to convince people that improvements can be made. The biggest thing I'm hearing out there at the moment is about the use of AI, being able to utilize the charging data that is available to identify patterns and bad charger behaviors. There are some businesses out there that are really leaning into this and doing this. I think that's kind of where the industry is going to need to go, and we're dipping our toe into that as well. But I think for me, I heard someone say this to me at ICNC the other week. It was a DC manufacturer that said, AI will just tell you that's going to go wrong. It's just when. So all your chargers are going to break down at some point, right? So just get the right processes in place to fix them when they do go wrong, rather than worrying about.
I like that. Brad, do you have any final comments for the listeners before we bring this chat to a close?
I think stick with it. I mean, I became an EV driver myself back at the start of the year. I'd always driven a nice car, and being in the industry, I felt like a bit of a fraud by not having an EV myself. So I dipped my toe in, and I was always concerned, like, is it a better product? There's going to be issues with charging, and I've actually found it to be a really refreshing experience. I love driving my EV car now. It feels like a smarter way of driving. It's made life easier. The experience of actually driving the car is better. I do want to see the range improvements on some cars I drive in e-tron. I listened to your podcast the other day where you were talking about the real world range, and e-trons you called out as one of the difficult ones, right? And it is. In the winter, I only get 100 miles out of it. In the summer, I'm getting 160, depending on my driving style. So I haven't been put off by that. And I think the experiences I've had with chargers pretty much are good, and it's only going to get better, and operators are only going to innovate and improve. So stick with it. I do think driving an EV is a good thing, and we can all benefit from that.
Fantastic. Brad Sandys, appreciate your time today. I think it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much. A fascinating discussion. I think you'll agree. It's time for a cool EV or renewable thing to share with your listeners. Continuing with our charger theme, in many places such as the UK, Netherlands and California, EV charging stations now outnumber petrol stations. The number of petrol stations in Britain, for example, has been in steady decline since the 1960s. There were 38,000 filling stations in 1964. That number halved between 92 and 2010, dropping from 18,000 to around 9,000. And it has since stabilised at roughly 8,300, 8,400. With charger locations now numbering over 85,000 and charger connectors now numbering over 120,000, it's a safe bet to say that there are now more connectors than petrol pumps. Long may it continue. The EV Musings podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence. See what charge points are available right now with live availability and unrivaled UK charge point coverage at your fingertips. Pay at thousands of charge points within the app or with the ZapMap charging card. Join over 1 million EV drivers, download ZapMap and charge with confidence. I hope you enjoyed listening to today's show. It was put together this week with the help of Brad Sandys. If you have any thoughts, comments, criticisms, or other general messages to pass on to me, I can be reached at info@evmusings.com. On the socials, I'm on Blue Sky at evmusings.bsky.social. I'm also on Instagram at evmusings, where I post those little short videos and the odd podcast extract regularly. Why not follow me there? Many thanks to everyone who supports me through Patreon on a monthly basis and through coffee.com on an ad hoc basis. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, why not buy me a coffee? Go to coffee.com/evmusings and you can do just that. ko-fi.com/evmusings. Takes Apple Pay too. Regular listeners will know about my 2 ebooks. So you've gone electric and so you've gone renewable. Now they're 99p each or equivalent, and you can get them on the Kindle store on Amazon. Now check out the links in the show notes for more information, as well as a link to my regular EV Musings newsletter and associated articles. Now I've spoke to a few of you, and I know that you're probably driving, walking, jogging, ironing, or sat on the sofa watching this on your phone. But if you can remember and you enjoyed the episode, drop a review in iTunes, please. Like, subscribe, leave a comment on YouTube, because it really helps. Thank you very much. If you've reached this part of the podcast and are still listening, thank you. Why not let me know you've got to this point by messaging me at musingsev.bsky.social with the words maintenance or repair, hashtag if you know, nothing else. Thanks as always to my co-founder Sam. I watch his YouTube videos, him on his electric unicycle, hacking along paths and down trails, by himself or with his friends. I often wonder what the main attraction is for him to do this. There must be a couple, right? So I asked him.
Trying to think of a few scenarios in my mind that I think graffiti.
Thanks for listening. Bye.